Please welcome President of Bank of America Michigan and Chair of the Detroit Regional Chamber Board of Directors, Matt Elliott.
Well, good morning. Good morning. It's great to see everyone here today. Thanks for getting up. It's not that early, so we no longer have an excuse. We can be here after having a fun night last night. I'd like to join, Ann and I would like to join Peter in congratulating you and Nancy on next year's chairmanship. You're going to have a lot of fun, and you are pretty much on the clock. Enjoy that. I also want to congratulate Sean and Suzanne on a phenomenal conference. You know, what I'm going to do. What Sandy and Suzanne asked me to do today is do a little bit of a double click into this theme of bridging the future together. And what we're going to do along the way in the next 9 minutes or so is use a few of the themes that we talked about last year as a way to do that. So if you remember, last year the theme was the power of and. And the idea was, hey, we can think differently than the normal either or way of thinking to drive the radical collaboration that Suzanne talked so eloquently about for this year's theme. So if you recall what that was about, you know, we said last year that we don't have to devolve. We don't have to, you know, fall into the false choice of thinking of things as one or the other, of left or right, or Democrat or Republican, or as Sandy just mentioned, an EV vehicle or an ICE vehicle. I don't see Dennis in here, so I don't think I need to say Spartan or Wolverine. But either way, we don't have to think that way. We can think differently. We can think about things as an and, not an or, and we land in a better spot than they otherwise would. And I've been reflecting over the last day or so as I've been sitting here with Ann, thinking about some of the wins that we talked about even just in the last 2 days. So think about this idea that we said last year. We said, you know, we can do economic development and sustainability. We can preserve our key industrial assets, and we can drive innovation. You remember Dan talked about that so much yesterday. The key that innovation will play in driving our economy forward and also retaining our talent. So here's a few wins. Number one of the things that the governor mentioned, she mentioned how the power of and has helped us land at this point over $15 billion of new industrial investment, and we've crossed over 14,000 new jobs. So we've done that, and the city of Detroit was just recently named as the #1 emerging startup ecosystem in the world. We can do them both. Last year here at the conference, the governor talked about growing population and the key to growing population. This is something that if you've been in the mayor's war room, that's one of the things that is the #1 stat that is on the board in the war room. And so this year, for the first time since 1957, we've grown population in the state of Michigan and in the city of Detroit. We've done them both. You know, there's one other thing we haven't done since 1957. You know what I'm talking about. Coach Campbell and Brad, they're on the case. We're going to get it done. All right. Okay, so what about this polling data that Sandy just talked about? What is it that keeps us from driving the power of and having the reality and the perception of what's going on in the state match? I think a lot of it has to do with this friend that we introduced to you last year, which we affectionately call the person on the path. Now, we're all leaders in this room, and we spend a lot of time trying to serve people with institutions or building these brick paths that you see here on the screen. But increasingly, the polling data would indicate that person, the bricks that we're building right now, they're not working for the person on the path. If they were, we wouldn't see these big gaps between perception and reality. And a lot of times, the people on the path are not your tribe, they're not the people that you work with day to day, but they're the people that need to win in order for the state to win. I'll tell you a little story. Ann and I are friends with a woman named Jennifer. She is a student aide in the Detroit Public Schools. She lives near Wayne State. She's the mother of 4 boys. She works very, very hard. She's got some advanced degree training, and she can't afford a car. She can't handle a situation where recently her refrigerator, which somehow in a rented home she's responsible for maintaining, it quit. So all of the food that, frankly, we help her pay for was going to go to waste. So somebody needed to step in to get a refrigerator. That was a $300 expense. It's not working for Jennifer, the person on the path, all right? The other thing that the polling data mentioned or would bring forward is the idea of trust. That not only is it not working enough for the person on the path doesn't believe it's going to, all right? That's a question of trust. So we're all leaders in this room, and how do we, as leaders, build trust? How do we build trust in our organizations? How do we build trust more broadly in society? Well, I think it starts with being heard. You know, Suzanne, you mentioned yesterday in your opening that you were told as a child, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use those organs in proportion, right? And I think that's really true. I think that we need to make sure that the people that we're here to serve feel heard. That's the number one thing. I think the other thing, too, is that leadership needs to be seen as authentic and honest. Too often, I think we always wonder what's the ulterior motive when someone is doing the work, right? I was really, really impressed by Speaker Ryan yesterday, who basically said, here's my philosophy. I'm a conservative, you know? I'm a Reagan conservative, I think is what he said. And MAGA ain't working for me, all right? So you might not like that, or you might like that regardless, but you know exactly where he stands. He's authentic. And I think that authenticity is critical if we're going to drive trust. The other thing that we have to do as leaders, if we're going to close the gap between that path and the brick path and where the user is, we have to challenge the status quo, right? What we're doing right now isn't getting it done. We know that. And that's frankly what we do when we come here to the Mackinac Policy Conference and try to drive change. So think about the way that the mayor and Chief White talked about the problem of mental health and how they're attacking it. They used data to help frame the problem, but then they told stories to help bring it to life. And I think that is another thing that's really critical, because they're able to demonstrate, number one, a problem that you can understand, a way to measure it, so measure progress, but ultimately that it works for people. And I think that's the key, not only to solving problems, but it's also the superpower of the Mackinac Policy Conference. You know, this is a Mackinac moment, and so what I'm going to do is sort of lift up the institution that Sandy always talks about, that the chamber is a steward of. But one of the things to me that makes the Mackinac Policy Conference incredibly powerful is the fact that we, number one, are able to build bridges with each other, right? We are, as I said this to President Guskowitz yesterday, you know, we take 1,500 leaders and you put them on an island with limited access to get on and off, apply them with unlimited alcohol, and what bad could possibly happen, right? But along the way, all the things that we just talked about that we need to do to build bridges, we do here, right? We get close to each other, we get proximate to each other. We meet people, Suzanne, if we're doing what you want us to do, we meet people who we would have never met otherwise, right? And we get a chance to share information, share viewpoints that ultimately are going to make us better, and they're going to help us drive conversations, not just today, but in the 365 days until Peter leads us to our next conference. And ultimately, what that helps us do is use the power of and to build those bridges, to bridge the future together. That's the magic of the Mackinac Policy Conference. That's the power of your leadership, and we're grateful for it. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.